All right, so today we're going to talk about rope flow movements for beginners that I recommend, the kind of the progression of the movements that you should try to learn so that you don't wind up spinning your wheels at this movement practice, this wonderful movement practice called rope flow. So now, what I mean by that is a lot of times I see, quite frankly, when you first start out, you might see somebody spinning a rope around on Instagram or somewhere, and it looks cool, or you think it'd be fun, or you want to try it, and you go out and get yourself a rope. But what you find out is that when you get home and start trying to do those things that you saw someone on the internet doing, you might get frustrated because it might be very challenging, or it's basically the equivalent of trying to skip grade school and go right to college in some cases. So what I recommend is these are the beginning and foundational movements that may not be as sexy, may not have quite as much sizzle, but if you start out with these movements, and you can work your way up in a few weeks even sometimes. Everyone's different. It might be a few days, might be a few months. But anyway, these are the movements I recommend you start with, and sort of the progression of movements that you go through and become at least moderately proficient at these movements before you start trying to tackle the more advanced and kind of fancy movements that you might have seen people doing. Now, before I jump right into the actual movements I recommend, I want to say that it's a good idea to have a basic foundation of a couple of concepts, a couple of principles that sometimes do confound people when they're getting started. I'm not going to go into any depth at all for these because that's not the focus of this video, but I want you to be able to at least understand that there's, first of all, the notion of overhand and underhand. And some people quite commonly are very comfortable with the overhand, and they kind of gravitate towards that immediately. And when they try to do underhand movements, they find some way to transform it right into overhand. So if that's you, just keep that in mind. Maybe record yourself a little bit. It always helps. And then that will help you see where you're making those mistakes and get it right. So overhand is basically a movement where the rope is passing your body at the ground level, passing toe to heel, like this right here. Okay, this is an overhand movement. The underhand is the opposite, where it's passing your body heel to toe. Okay, and there's also what we call transverse plane, where it's passing either toe to toe, like this, or heel to heel, like this behind me. Okay, so those are the different, like a box, the four different ways, the four different planes the rope can go in. And that transverse plane comes into play with the other concept I want you to be familiar with, or at least have an idea of, which is this thing called the cardinal law. So when you see people flowing with the rope, you may not even notice it, but the rope actually never changes direction. So if I'm standing here and this rope is going this direction, this is my overhand side and this is my underhand side. But no matter where I turn and around in circles or anything like that, the rope continues in the same direction. And that's the cardinal law. So the cardinal law basically states that you turn yourself more or less around the rope. So I'm not going to go into in-depth in that. I want you to just be able to understand that it exists, and especially for these movements we're talking about today, most of them don't even really, you're not moving around so much, you're kind of stationary. So you won't need to worry a lot about the cardinal law, but it's a good idea to have a basic understanding that that is a thing that you want to try to adhere to, especially when you're starting out. So now, without further ado, we're going to talk about the moves. First, I recommend starting out with some one-armed movements because it helps you, and all through your rope flow journey, it'll be useful to help you learn different movements. But even in the beginning, you start with your overhand, one-arm movement, okay? So it's just passing toe to heel. You want to try to keep that rope as vertical as possible, but that's the overhand. The underhand is the opposite, heel to toe, right? So that's a simple move. And then you want to make sure you do everything on both sides, right? So left hand, underhand, and then there's the left hand overhand, and it's toe to heel, overhand, and heel to toe, underhand. So you want to learn both of those movements. Then from there, you stay with the one-arm movement, okay? But you're going to do what I call the figure 8 movement, right? So you start with the same swing, but then you take the rope and you cross over your body and you bring it back down. So in this case, I'm doing the underhand, right? Now, many of you might find that it's easier to do the overhand. So that's okay, start with that. But remember to do both hands, right? And this, your hand moves in this figure 8, this sidewards, like an infinity symbol across your chest there. And then you kind of bend the rope around your body. Now you do the same thing with the overhand version, right? So you take the rope, start with your overhand swing, and then you're gonna go across your body in this figure 8 movement, okay? And keep that verticality as much as possible. So if you notice, my palm is turning over, so it's palm up, palm down, palm up, palm down. So again, same thing with both hands. Always, don't ever just do it with one hand, okay? So if you're right-handed, always make sure you get your left hand in the movement. And also, That's the key. Make sure you do everything in your right hand, your left hand, and also in overhand and underhand orientation. So once you've got those movements down, we're gonna jump into some two-hand movements. Get your OK grip here, kind of the classic OK grip. You're gonna hold just enough pressure on those fingers to keep the rope from sliding out of your hand. And then you're gonna start with a similar thing. You're going to go with basically a side swing, okay? Two hands there on the side, and then you cross over, two hands here on this side, and that's the overhand swing. You do the same thing with the underhand, just to get used to and comfortable with doing the same thing, but doing it with both hands. Now, you're not gonna do, that's not really a move I'm recommending you to do, it's the ability to get comfortable with that movement. Because what we're gonna do is we're gonna jump in with two hands and we're gonna go with the race and chase. Race and chase is kind of technical. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but essentially it's a figure 8 with both hands, okay? So I'm doing underhand race and chase here, and you'll see that the reason it's called race and chase is because in this case, my left hand is leading, my right hand is following. Basically the pinky is this pinky finger of my left hand is tracing that figure 8, and my right hand is following it. Now, the overhand race and chase is when your thumb is leading and tracing the figure 8, and you're in this case I'm leading with my right hand. Now you can change it up. You can change it up so now I'm leading with my left hand. So that's a good idea to do both. But the race and chase is an important movement because it gets that spinal rotation going better than most of these other movements do. And that same figure 8 pattern is there from what you did with the one-handed move, but it's a good place to start. Now that we've got the race and chase down, we're going to switch over to the next move, which is the matador. And this is one of the moves that's very common and foundational to a lot of flows. So it's important to learn this movement. And I find it to be easier than the race and chase for people to learn the technicality of it, but some people not so much. My mother is in her late 70s. She picked it up for the underhand version, it took a day, but it took a little while. But overhand wasn't so bad. So anyway, the matador is basically two swings on one side. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2. You cross one hand over your body, okay? And then you cross the other hand over your body to cross over. So it's 1, 2. Unlike the race and chase where you're doing 1 on each side, right? This is the race and chase. The matador is 1 and then a 2. And every time you do that second turn, the hand that's higher switches. So one hand is low and the other hand is high, and then it switches over on the second turn there. So this is the matador, okay? And this is a very foundational movement that's used in almost all kind of more advanced flows at some point. It's commonly used. So now, of course, you know what comes next. We're gonna do the matador, but in the underhand, heel to toe. Now, this move is really a great movement for coordination and timing, okay? And it gives you a good weight shift, okay? So it's a great movement to learn. Now, the next thing we're gonna talk about, and the last one of our foundational movement patterns in the progression that you should probably learn them, is the good old-fashioned dragon roll, okay? So the dragon roll is a movement where it's a transverse movement. So it's not overhand or underhand. I got my underhand side there, and I got my overhand side there in this case. And this is the dragon roll. So basically you're twisting your torso, and the rope is going around your body in what we call transverse, neither overhand or underhand. Now the thing with dragon roll is, you want to make sure you do it in both directions. So instead of from right foot to left, in this case, my left foot to right foot I was doing just now, I'm gonna switch it over to right foot to left foot in the opposite direction. So that's what you wanna do, is learn the dragon roll and then learn to do it in the opposite direction, okay? Now, that is pretty much all you need to do. Those are the moves that you should learn and become proficient in before you start getting into fancier moves. With the dragon roll, one intermediate tip for you to learn once you've gotten the dragon roll down is the ability to turn around. That's the quickest way to go from, like right now, this is my left to right foot, but when I turn around again, it's my right foot to left foot. That's the quickest way to change your dragon roll direction, and that gives a little footwork to the game, and that's when we start getting into more intermediate movements. But these are the movements I recommend that you all begin with, sort of almost in that order. After the dragon roll, what comes next, Amir, you might ask? I would recommend you start working on your sneaks then, right? So the sneak is a cool movement where it's an underhand. Hey kitties. It's an underhand. This is an underhand sneak on the right, okay? And this is an underhand sneak on the left, okay? Where the sneak is the hand that goes behind your body. So since we didn't go into much detail about these movements in particular in the sake of time, right, here on YouTube, I want to make sure that you know that you can go look online for the names of those movements. I'll put them on the screen as we said them. Or you can also check out our free or pay what you can course, where we do go into detail about those movements and why and how they are effective and useful, and how you can use them to kind of jumpstart your rope flow practice when you're a beginner, okay? I'll put the link for that in the comments, and please give me your feedback. Let me know what you think of this video or any other content related to rope flow or other stuff that you might be looking forward to from us in the future. And in the meantime, and most importantly, go Bills. Go Bills.